Okay, folks, we're going to start with a quick little lesson on comparison operators. It's kind of a simple concept, just extending what we're already learning around conditional expressions, if statements. But we got to take some time to learn about them. So here we go. All right, so some objectives for today. We're going to learn how to use different comparison operators, and we're going to use them in conditional expressions. Just a quick announcement. I want to make sure everybody's all caught up and nobody's falling too far behind. If you realize today that you have a couple of assignments that are due today, tomorrow, or so on, you need to make sure you keep moving. So that means taking the CD home and installing it at home, or meeting with me at lunch or after school, particularly on Mondays. It's time to catch up. All right, so the docket for today, we're going to start with if statements, just reviewing how to do if and else. And then I'll teach you about comparison operators, and then we'll look at an example and be done. So remember, of course, that a conditional expression is this if statement. It decides if the code's going to do one thing or if it's going to do another. And the big idea here is that we use this if right here, and we say if the computer then checks a condition, and it says, okay, if that condition is true, then we do that top piece of code, and if that condition is false, then we do the bottom piece of code. So it's kind of like asking a true-false question, right? And then if it's true, the code does one thing, and if it's false, the code does the other. So let me give you an example. This is called the spelling bee, and you can see we have this box up here that says spell the word received correctly. It's spelled incorrectly in the top there. Okay, so if we wanted to then press this button to check to see if the word receive has been spelled correctly, we would need an if statement, right? We'd need to ask the computer, is it spelled correctly? And let's say we'd wanted to say something nice to the user if they got it right, and something mean to the user if they got it wrong. So we would start, of course, with an if, then, else, and if statement, right? So you don't have to type it in this order, but this is just to visualize it, right? This is a conditional expression. It will ask a question, answer it, and then do the appropriate code. So the question is, if what? What's the question that we're going to ask here? We need to ask whether the word received is spelled correctly, and they're going to put that in the text box. So we might want to say, if text box 1.text, of course, if the text within the text box is equal to, received spelled correctly, then do one thing, and if it is not, then do something else. So you might want to say text box 1.text equals received. Now that's our condition. The computer will ask, does text box 1.text equal received? And if it does, it will do the top code, and if it doesn't, it will do the bottom code. So we want to say something nice if it does, so we say, yeah, you're right on the top. And else, if it does not equal received, then we want to say that they're wrong. Okay. So that's all review about how to do if statements, and we're going to just extend that the tiniest little bit with something called a comparison operator. So far in an if statement, again, we have this condition which asks this true-false question that the computer tests, and then it decides whether to do the top code or the bottom code. And we just looked at this a second ago, right, where it says text box 1.text equals received, right? Now that's the condition. That's the question that the computer is asking. And what we're about to learn is how to have the computer ask more than just that question. So right now we know how to say, is something equal to another thing? That's nice. But we want to say a little bit more. And what comparison operators do is they give us a few more options. And you've probably seen these before in your math class. We've already learned the equal one on the top. The not equal one is kind of tricky. That's with both the greater than and less than symbols right next to each other. Okay, and then we have less than and greater than, which are just like in math. And then less than or equal to and greater than or equal to is a little bit different than what you see in math. It's actually two things. You say less than, and then you also say equal to. Okay, so the point of these is instead of saying if text box 1.text is equal to received, right? If we're doing some math or something, we can say text box.text is less than 7, or text box 1.text is greater than or equal to 12. And it's going to help us to not just say equals in those conditions, but we can ask other questions as well. So let me give you an example. Let's say this is a funny program that's supposed to rate your age. You put your age in the text box, and if you're old, it's supposed to make fun of you for being old, and if you're young, it'll say, like, you're young. Okay. So again, we're going to use an if statement with the else and the end if, right? This is how we have the computer make a choice. Okay, and let's say that the age 50 is our cutoff. We want to say, all right, if somebody's older than 50, then we make fun of them for being old. And if somebody's younger than 50, then they're pretty young. That's okay. So we say, all right, if the text in the text box is 50 or bigger than 50, right, 60, 70, then we want to do one thing. And if it's not as big as 50, then we want to do something else. So for that, we would use the greater than or the less than operator, okay? Either one. And now we're asking the question, if the stuff in the text box is less than 50, then we're going to do the stuff on the top. And if it's greater than 50, we're going to do the stuff on the bottom. So less than 50 is the top, so we put something about being young there. Greater than 50 is on the bottom, so we write something that makes fun of them for that. And this will work perfectly to message box them and rate their age. And so let's just look at how it would work. So let's say we put 22 in there, for example, right? Okay, so how would this go? So we would come to here, right, and the program would say, all right, textbox1.text is less than 50. So we're going to do the top piece of code because this condition is true. The stuff in the text box is less than 50. So we would see you're so young. If I was to put 60 in the code, however, something different would happen. The computer would check the condition, say, okay, 60 is greater than 50. It is not less than 50. This is not true. And thus it would go to the bottom piece of code, and we would see, dude, you're old. Now here's an interesting question. What would happen if we used 50? Okay, is 50 less than 50? No, it's not. Okay, and so that means that somebody who is 50, textbox1.text is not less than 50, and it would tell them that they're old, which is seems fine, right? But let's say 50, that's the oldest you want it to be. You say that, okay, if it's 50, I want them to be not old, okay? Because if they're just 50 and not 51, then I think they're all right. So we could change it to say this. You could say, all right, if the textbox1.text is greater than or equal to 50, we could use this condition instead. But does this work? So now I've changed it to be greater than or equal to 50, and this has reversed the condition, right? So now if you put in 50, then textbox1.text is greater than or equal to 50, okay? And that means that we're going to do the top code, and that says darn young. And if I put something in that is, less than, like 40, right? 40 is less than or equal to 50, and that means we would do this bottom code. And so actually, if I switch the condition around like this, I also need to switch the order of the message boxes. Now, if I put in 50, right? Textbox1.text is greater than or equal to 50. Well, yes, it is 50, so it is equal to 50. That's okay, and we'll get the your old message box up top. And if you put something in smaller, like 22, 22 is not greater than or equal to 50, so you would get the code on the bottom. Hopefully you got a chance to do that. I would write down the chart for the comparison operators, all those different operators in your vocabulary sheet. That's your only piece of vocab for today. And then you have one assignment that's really tied into this, and it's called the comparison test. Basically, two random numbers are going to come up, and you'll have to decide whether one is bigger or the other, and then have the computer tell you whether you were right or not.